It's Friday evening. You're watching News Center here on CNBC-TV18. We're going to be focusing on the bills that have been taken up by the Union Parliament and also a report which has come on Ola Electric about the losses suffered by the company in FY23. Let's begin with the Lok Sabha first. Yes, the Lok Sabha has passed the Jan Vishwas bill during the monsoon session. The bill seeks to decriminalize nearly 200 provisions in 42 central acts, which include several colonial-era laws to promote ease of doing business. The acts include those related to agriculture, media, trade, among others. The bill converts several fines to penalties, which means court prosecution won't be necessary to administer punishments. It also removes imprisonment as a punishment for many offences in the country. We're now joined by Murli Neelakanthan, principal lawyer at Amicus. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Murli, I'd like to begin by asking you, will this really reduce the regulatory burden for the industry, or do you feel that some of the provisions to decriminalize laws, especially in drugs and cosmetics, in PMLA and others, could be counterproductive?
Thanks for having me. I think the idea is very good. Unfortunately, if you look at a few aspects of it, it doesn't really give me much hope. First, look at what are those crimes that have been decriminalized. Most of them are never prosecuted. So if you take examples, let's take the Drugs Act. The one that they've decriminalized, how many people have actually gone to jail? Zero. So it's a provision that exists, never been enforced, nobody's gone to jail, and now you've said we'll have a fine of 5 lakhs of rupees. So frankly, it doesn't make any difference to those people carrying out business. This is not, as some people have been concerned about, let major defaulters off the hook. So if you look at the cough syrup, this doesn't affect that. So people shouldn't be worried about it. People should be worried that if the new Drugs Act comes into force, then we have a big crisis. Because under the new Drugs Act, read with this section, they are allowing drugs which do not meet specification to just have fines. Those will result in deaths. So for example, if you take simple aspirin, which is given as a blood thinner, for those who have had stents, if this aspirin is not the dose that is written on the label, according to the new drugs bill, you just get a little bit of punishment, which is a fine. But it will actually kill people. So that's where I think the concern is for a lot of experts. And this has not been taken up by the JPC. If you look at the people who've been interviewed as experts in the JPC, not one of them is a doctor, not one of them is from civil society, patient groups, none of them. All of these laws, the only people who are experts before the JPC are from the ministry. So where is the consultation on this? Yes, it eases business, but I don't think it has a big impact. I mean, the postal bill, the Post Act, for example, what they've decriminalized is silly. I mean, nobody's ever been prosecuted under it. So it looks like they're decriminalizing, but it'll have zero impact on business. It'll have zero impact on the judiciary. It'll have zero impact on the legal process.
Okay. I'd just like to ask you about the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, because there were concerns about certain provisions being watered down and how this would set a bad example. The ministry has put out a clarification that only 27D has been made compoundable, which deals with other violations related to Drugs and Cosmetics Act and not with regard to spurious drugs which may cause any kind of hurt, injury or death. What do you feel about this clarification that has come in?
This clarification, as I said, has to be read with what is the proposed amendment to the Drugs Act, which is the drugs bill, where they have 3 categories. You have the spurious, you have misbranded, you have adulterated, and a category of about 30 items, which includes, strangely enough, lack of an active substance. So if you claim a tablet of aspirin has, let's say, 100 milligrams of aspirin in it, it only has 70. The government seems to suggest that that's okay. There's no big deal. But if you speak to a heart patient who's been taking this every day and realizes over time that he's not actually getting the full dose, he's going to blame the doctor. If you take someone who's been taking pills for diabetes, for hypertension, blood pressure, and if you say, actually, you only need to provide, when you say 100 grams, 100 milligrams, 70 is enough. Actually, it's not enough. It will cause death. So I don't think this kind of an attitude to, oh, it's no big deal, actually works. And there are others as well. So if you take that list of 30, there's one which is dissolution, which means it has to dissolve within a particular period of time in a particular environment. What happens if it doesn't dissolve? So it actually doesn't put out what it claims as a medicine. Then what happens? So there are lots of these which are the worrying bit. So those who have expressed concerns are expressing concerns on the basis that the government is not prosecuting for these offenses now when they should be. And this will become the standard. Even when there have been serious offenses of death, the government is not prosecuted. So I understand where the concerns are coming from.
Right.
But the bigger concern is that you've not prosecuted anybody and held anybody liable for deaths. So frankly, is this really an issue? It's a very cynical way of looking at it, but there's a problem.
Okay. Right. I'd like to ask you about some of the provisions. Do you think any other provisions will actually help the industry? If we speak about the Food Safety and Standards Act, there were provisions where there was imprisonment, there was a fine as well, and now that has been substituted by only a higher fine in some of the cases. Do you think these are welcome steps? Are these a deterrent?
Again, I go back to the same thing. How many people have gone to jail for an adulterated food item? Zero. So, on one hand, we have these supposedly draconian provisions, but nobody's ever gone to jail. Even on the Drugs Act, food, you take any of those legislations where they're trying to make it easier to do business, nobody's been prosecuted. On the few occasions that prosecutions have happened under the Drugs Act or the Food Act, people have had 10,000 rupees, 20,000 rupees fines, and then everybody goes home. So it's just a waste of time for the legal system because nobody's being prosecuted with any sincerity. So that being the case, I said, it looks very nice to produce a bill that has, 100 pages of provisions in it, in the schedule. But the reality is nobody's actually going to jail. Nobody's really complying with it. The legal system doesn't really care. So all those problems for business arise only if there is enforcement. And there is no enforcement. So, it's a nice bill, but fairly important, harmless, won't do anything good, but won't do anything bad. I think that is a standard these days for legislation. Will it harm?
Okay. All right. Murli Neelakantan, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. You're telling us that this bill, of course, leaves a lot to be desired. We're going to shift our focus